March 16, 1962. A U.S. military aircraft lifted off from Guam and vanished without a trace. No mayday. No wreckage. No answers. Over 100 soldiers disappeared into the sky, and the government never spoke of them again. This is not a theory. This is a true story. The departure into shadows. It was March 1962, and the Pacific air buzzed with silence, the kind that follows secrecy. The Cold War was an invisible battlefield stretching across oceans, and beneath its veil, a flight unlike any other was preparing for departure from Travis Air Force Base in California. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739, a Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation, stood tall on the tarmac. It wasn't a commercial voyage. This was a military-chartered aircraft, one that would carry 93 hand-picked U.S. Army soldiers and 3 South Vietnamese officers across the Pacific. Their destination, Saigon, via Hawaii, Wake Island, Guam, and finally the Philippines. Officially, it was a transport mission. Unofficially, it was something more. The men who boarded were not infantry or pilots. They were specialists, technicians in communications and electronics. Their uniforms were unmarked. Their orders were sealed. Most of them weren't told the full nature of their assignment. One soldier, 23-year-old Staff Sergeant James Martin, wrote in a letter home, "I'm headed west, far from home. Can't say where, but it feels important." That letter would be the last his family received. In the cockpit, Captain Gregory Thomas, a seasoned pilot with over 19,000 flight hours, performed his checks. He'd flown in World War II and Korea. This, he told the crew, should be routine. But even he knew, routine had a different meaning when your manifest was classified and your passengers couldn't talk about their orders. The aircraft made its first 2 stops without incident, Hickam Field in Hawaii, then Wake Island. Along the way, Sergeant Charles Armstrong noted that guards remained unusually close to the plane at every stop, even during refueling. He whispered to another passenger, "Feels like they think someone might try to get on or off." By the time the flight reached Guam on March 15th, the tension had settled into every rivet of the fuselage. The soldiers, most of them under 30, were quiet. Some played cards. Others scribbled in notebooks or stared out at the runway's edge, where jungle met ocean. Then came the final leg. At 12:57 a.m. on March 16, 1962, Flight 739 lifted off from Andersen Air Force Base, heading toward Clark Air Base in the Philippines. The weather was clear. The radio check was routine. And yet, something unspoken hung in the air. Back in Ohio, James Martin's fiancée folded his last letter into a drawer. In Alabama, Sergeant Armstrong's father reread a telegram that only said, "In transit. All's well." Across the country, families waited, expecting a call, a message, a sign. None would come. Flight 739 vanished somewhere over the Philippine Sea. No distress call. No debris. Only silence. Vanishing point. By 2:22 a.m. on March 16, 1962, barely 85 minutes after takeoff from Guam, radio operators at Clark Air Base, Philippines, noticed something wrong. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 had failed to check in. The standard position report was overdue. At first, there was no alarm. Technical delays happened. But as the minutes turned to hours, silence replaced routine. No radio contact. No radar echoes. No emergency beacon. Somewhere over 1,000 miles of ocean, the Super Constellation and its 107 passengers had vanished. The U.S. military responded with urgency. Within hours, they launched the largest coordinated air-sea search in Pacific history. 8 Navy ships, 48 aircraft, and over 1,300 personnel swept the waters between Guam and the Philippines. Day after day, they scanned endless blue, a floating net of eyes and sonar. But there was nothing. No oil slick. No debris. No life raft. The aircraft had disappeared as if it had been erased from the sky. Then came a flicker of hope and confusion. A Pan American World Airways flight, traveling along a similar route just minutes behind Flight 739, reported a strange sight to air traffic control. The crew described seeing a bright flash of light in the sky at the approximate time and location of the missing aircraft. It lasted only seconds, then vanished into the night. Investigators considered the report seriously. An in-air explosion? A mechanical failure? Or something far more sinister? The aircraft had been thoroughly inspected at every stop. No mechanical problems were noted. Weather was clear. The pilots were highly experienced. Nothing suggested a natural cause. Behind closed doors, military officials explored the possibility of sabotage. Security at the layover points had been strict, yet brief ground access in Guam or Wake Island could have allowed an intruder or device on board. However, no evidence ever surfaced. Back home, families waited for news. Telegrams began to arrive, cold and formal. "Your son is missing. Search underway." There was no explanation, no timeline, and no comfort. Just the word, missing. For loved ones, hope faded slowly, painfully. Newspapers picked up the story, but without a body or a wreck, it slipped from the headlines almost as quickly as it had entered. Sergeant Armstrong's mother sat by the radio for 3 days, listening for updates that never came. Staff Sergeant Martin's fiancée called military hotlines, each call ending with the same answer: "There is no new information at this time." On March 23, the U.S. government declared Flight 739 officially lost. No cause was assigned. No memorial service was organized by the military. It was as if the passengers had simply ceased to exist. In a world divided by ideologies and secrecy, 107 lives had vanished in peace, not war. And still, the silence stretched on. Secrets in the sky. The official story ended on March 23, 1962, when the U.S. military called off the search. There were no survivors. No wreckage. No explanation. But for the families left behind, the silence felt strategic, too controlled, too clean. As weeks turned into months, alternative theories surfaced. None officially endorsed. All chilling. One of the most persistent, Flight 739 was sabotaged. It wasn't just the lack of a distress signal. Pilots trained under Captain Gregory Thomas knew he would have tried everything to radio a mayday. But if the plane had exploded midair, instantly, he'd never have had the chance. The Pan Am crew's report of a bright flash became a central clue. But when journalists pressed the military for more information, the answer was always the same: no further comment. Flight 739 was not just another transport mission. Its passengers, though officially called communication specialists, were rumored to be intelligence operatives, early boots in what would become the Vietnam War. Their orders were classified. Their names were not released to the public until long after the incident. Even more troubling was the simultaneous explosion of a second flying Tiger Line aircraft, Flight 7816, that same week. It was a cargo plane carrying highly explosive materials. That flight went down near Guam as well, killing all 3 crew members. Though ruled an accident, the timing raised eyebrows. Was someone targeting these aircraft? A third theory, one never acknowledged officially, suggests the flight may have entered restricted airspace or crossed paths with an international military operation. If so, was it shot down? Mistaken identity. A political message. The Cold War was notorious for such unacknowledged confrontations, but no evidence, no satellite data, no radar logs, were ever released. In 1962, the U.S. government was deeply invested in controlling the narrative of its early involvement in Southeast Asia. The passengers aboard Flight 739 were among the first Americans deployed covertly in support of South Vietnam, before the war was publicly declared. Their deaths, if admitted, might have revealed too much. To the families, the secrecy felt like betrayal. In a declassified letter obtained decades later, a Pentagon official wrote, "The sensitive nature of their assignment prohibits full disclosure." Even in loss, these men had no names, no graves, no place in history. Staff Sergeant Martin's father wrote to Congress. His letter went unanswered. One mother wrote simply, "How do you grieve someone the government won't acknowledge is dead?" And that was the cruelest cut of all, not the disappearance, but the erasure. They weren't killed in action. They weren't missing in combat. They were simply gone. In a war that hadn't officially begun, 107 Americans had already vanished. And the sky, ever watchful, refused to give them back. Echoes of the unreturned. Years passed. Vietnam would erupt into full-scale war. Thousands of American lives would be lost in battles the world watched on television. But Flight 739 remained a silent casualty, unseen, unnamed, unspoken. For the families, silence became ritual. There were no dog tags returned, no folded flags, no remains to bury. The U.S. Army refused to inscribe their names on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. officially. These men did not die in combat. Their mission wasn't public. Their deaths weren't acknowledged. But to their loved ones, this distinction meant nothing. One by one, the families formed their own network, a coalition of the forgotten. They met in church basements, veterans' halls, and kitchen tables. They swapped stories, telegrams, fragments of information. What they lacked in answers, they replaced with persistence. In 2006, 44 years after the disappearance, a group of families funded a private memorial. On a quiet hill in Columbia Falls, Maine, near the headquarters of Wreaths Across America, they erected a stone monument. It reads, "Dedicated to those who served and disappeared on Flying Tiger Line Flight 739. Gone but never forgotten." All 107 names are carved into the granite, etched not by the government, but by those who refused to let them vanish twice. Visitors leave behind American flags, handwritten notes, and small dog tags. Some come from children of the missing, now older than their fathers were when they disappeared. For some, the monument is enough. A place to grieve, to say the goodbyes never given. But for others, questions still linger. Why was the mission classified in the first place? Why did the government seal the investigation? What really happened in that stretch of sky between Guam and the Philippines? In 2021, nearly 60 years after the disappearance, a group of families again petitioned the Department of Defense to include the Flight 739 soldiers on the Vietnam Memorial. The request was denied. The same answer echoed back: they were not killed in hostile action. Yet what could be more hostile than vanishing into history with no truth, no record, and no justice? The story of Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 is not just about a missing aircraft. It is about memory. It is about the cost of secrets. It is about those who serve in silence, and those who grieve in it. In the end, Flight 739 is a question written in sky and sea. What does a nation owe to those it sends into the dark? The Pacific still holds its silence. And 107 souls remain, suspended between fact and forgotten. They weren't lost in war. They were lost in silence. No battlefield, no gravestone, no official acknowledgement. Just a flight that vanished, and a truth that never landed. The sky took them, and history tried to forget them. But we won't.